Headlines declare a standoff at the top of the world. President Donald Trump, demanding a new deal in 30 days, threatens to bring the Canadian economy to its knees with crippling tariffs. But in Ottawa, new Prime Minister Mark Carney delivers a stunning rebuke, declaring the United States is no longer a reliable partner. With an August 1st deadline looming, Trump is expecting a surrender. Instead, he's met a wall of defiance. Billions of dollars hang in the balance. Why, in the face of overwhelming pressure, is Canada refusing to back down? For over a century, the relationship between the United States and Canada was the global standard for international partnership. It wasn't just a trade agreement. It was a deeply intertwined economic and cultural alliance built on a foundation of shared values and mutual trust. The 49th parallel was less a border and more a seam, connecting two nations whose fortunes rose and fell together. From energy grids to automotive manufacturing, their economies were woven into a single continental fabric, a model of stability in a volatile world. But this historic foundation began to fracture under the seismic pressure of America First nationalism. The Trump administration reframed the relationship from one of partnership to one of predation, arguing that Canada had taken advantage of American generosity for decades. The language of diplomacy was replaced by the language of the deal, and trust was replaced by suspicion. The first major blow landed on March 4th, 2025, when President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods, justifying it as a necessary tool to force concessions on unrelated issues like immigration and drug trafficking. Canada, under then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, immediately fired back with billions in retaliatory tariffs. The era of friendly cooperation was over. The stage was now set for a new kind of leader and a new, more defiant chapter in the standoff. President Donald Trump's strategy was built on a simple, powerful principle: maximum pressure. He believed that the only way to get what he wanted from allies was to hit them so hard they had no choice but to concede. The March 4th tariffs were not just a negotiating tactic. They were an act of economic shock and awe, designed to create a crisis that only he could solve with a deal. The official justification, linking trade to fentanyl smuggling and border control, was, for many analysts, a smokescreen. The true goal was to shatter the existing trade relationship and rebuild it on terms more favorable to his America First agenda. He viewed Canada's economic dependence on the US market as its ultimate vulnerability and intended to exploit it without mercy. This was a transactional president who saw treaties not as binding commitments, but as starting points for renegotiation under duress. The pressure campaign escalated dramatically at the G7 summit. There, Trump and Canada's newly elected Prime Minister, Mark Carney, agreed to a 30-day window to negotiate a new, comprehensive economic and security pact. To the outside world, it looked like a potential off-ramp. In reality, it was an ultimatum. Trump was putting a clock on the crisis, betting that Canada would buckle as the deadline approached. When the talks inevitably stalled, with Canada refusing to be rushed into concessions, Trump unleashed his final threat. At the beginning of August, he announced he was raising the tariffs from 25% to a crippling 35% on all Canadian goods not explicitly protected by the USMCA. The message was clear: sign the deal on my terms, or face economic devastation. For Trump, this was the endgame. He had pushed all his chips to the center of the table, confident that his opponent had no choice but to fold. But in Ottawa, the pressure campaign was having the opposite effect. In April 2025, Canada had elected a new leader in Mark Carney, a man with a fundamentally different background from his predecessors. As the former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, Carney was a global financial heavyweight who understood economic leverage not as a bully's club, but as a strategist's tool. His response to Trump's aggression was not emotional or retaliatory. It was cold, calculated, and defiant. After his first meeting with Trump at the White House in May, Carney made a declaration that stunned Washington and redefined the conflict. He stood before the world's media and stated unequivocally, Canada is not for sale. He went further, delivering a line that signaled a historic realignment in Canadian foreign policy. The United States is no longer a reliable partner. This wasn't just rhetoric. Carney's defiance was rooted in a deep understanding of the economic and legal realities that Trump was ignoring. He and his team knew the dirty little secret of Trump's tariff threat. It was mostly a bluff. Thanks to the intricate rules of the USMCA, the very deal Trump had celebrated, between 95% and 100% of all Canadian goods were already exempt from these kinds of unilateral tariffs. The 35% levy, while painful for some specific sectors, could not touch the vast majority of Canada's trade. Carney knew he had the ultimate leverage, the law. He publicly stated he was in no rush to talk to Trump, and that no deal is better than a bad deal. This wasn't just Carney's position, it was a view strongly backed at home. Influential provincial leaders like Ontario's Doug Ford rallied behind the federal government, calling for Canada to retaliate strongly and refuse to be intimidated. Carney wasn't just standing up to Trump, he was channeling a newfound national consensus that Canada had to stand on its own. And so the 30-day deadline came and went, not with a Canadian surrender, but with a deafening silence from Ottawa. The August 1st tariff hike went into effect, but its impact was blunted by the shield of the USMCA. President Trump was left in a political trap of his own making. He had demanded a deal and failed to get one. He had used a threat that turned out to be far less powerful than advertised. To back down would be a public admission of defeat. To continue the fight would mean inflicting further economic pain on American consumers and businesses for diminishing returns. Mark Carney had refused to play the game by Trump's rules. He had weathered the storm, called the bluff, and maintained his country's economic sovereignty, leaving the US president fuming and the world's most successful partnership in tatters. While Mark Carney's defiance was a strategic success, it came at a significant cost. Standing up to the United States is never free. The sectors of the Canadian economy left unprotected by the USMCA were hit hard by the 35% tariff. The iconic softwood lumber industry, a cornerstone of countless rural communities, was once again caught in the crossfire. For these towns, the tariffs weren't a geopolitical game. They were an existential threat. Mill owners faced an impossible choice: absorb the massive new cost and operate at a loss, or cut production and lay off workers. In response, the Carney government was forced to intervene, rolling out a $1.2 billion Canadian dollar aid package to help the struggling industry survive the storm and pivot toward new markets in Asia and Europe. The relief fund was a necessary lifeline, but it was also a stark symbol of the economic damage. Taxpayer money being spent to patch a wound deliberately inflicted by the nation's closest ally. Beyond the direct impact on specific industries, the trade war unleashed a more corrosive poison: uncertainty. For decades, Canadian and American businesses had invested billions in each other's economies, confident in the stability of the relationship. That confidence was now shattered. The flow of capital began to slow as businesses on both sides of the border paused investment decisions, unwilling to commit money in such a volatile and unpredictable environment. For Canada, the long-term cost of this standoff is the chilling effect on investment and growth, forcing a difficult and expensive economic reorientation away from its largest trading partner. Carney's strategy was to protect Canada's sovereignty, but the price of that sovereignty was short-term pain and long-term uncertainty. This economic pain was not a one-way street. President Trump's tariffs were a boomerang that came flying back at the American economy. While Canada is often seen as the dependent partner, the reality is far more complex. Canada is the second largest foreign investor in the United States. Hundreds of Canadian-owned companies operate across the US, employing hundreds of thousands of Americans in good, well-paying jobs. When the US government declares economic war on Canada, it destabilizes the very Canadian firms that create those American jobs. Punishing Canada means punishing the American workers they employ and the American communities they support. Furthermore, the breakdown in trust has profound consequences for future investment. An American state governor or mayor trying to attract a new multi-billion-dollar factory or headquarters from a Canadian company now faces a massive hurdle. How can they promise stability and a friendly business environment when the federal government is actively hostile to that company's home country? As Carney himself pointed out, the integrated nature of the North American economy means any attempt to harm one part inevitably damages the whole. The tariffs designed to give the US leverage have instead made America a less predictable, less reliable, and ultimately less attractive place for its single most important source of foreign investment. The blowback isn't just felt in higher prices at the store. It's felt in the jobs that don't get created and the factories that don't get built. A president's demand for a deal, met by a prime minister's defiant refusal, has pushed the world's closest alliance to the breaking point. The standoff has revealed the limits of American pressure and the newfound resilience of a Canada unwilling to trade its sovereignty for security. The old foundation of trust has been shattered, leaving both nations to navigate a new and treacherous economic landscape alone, together. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.